Hi, and welcome to the HR Green Room, the place where people, culture, and a couple of splashes of green come together. We are your hosts. I'm Louise Johnston, Head of Customer Success at Phase 3.
And I'm James Proctor, Chief Operating Officer at Phase 3.
And together we lift the curtain on the world of HR with fresh ideas, honest conversations, and a few surprises along the way. Each episode will ask what made us green with envy, what deserves the green light, and of course, we'll be joined by brilliant guests as well who will bring their own colour into the conversation. So grab a seat, the show is about to start, and this is the HR Green Room. So, today's HR Green Room is all about insights and analytics, something that you, James Proctor, are very interested in, very adept at, strong influence within the industry. You know, this is where you shine and where I always like to make the claim straight away that I am not a technical person. But sometimes that's where I think what makes us and Phase 3 quite unique and quite happy with our customers is where I ask the stupid questions where
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing, but where I often feel in my role that I can ask you anything, and I won't be judged either, because data for me, it's crucial. I do get it in any organisation.
Well, you've been through an interesting journey recently in customer success at Phase 3, haven't you, in terms of data? So
yeah, towards becoming a much more data-driven department rather than based on just what you're feeling or hearing, based on the data.
And that's the journey a lot of HR people are going through as well.
It is. Yeah. It is. And it's an area where you absolutely need this data. I think many organisations pull data from so many different sources, different systems. You could ask any HR person, probably myself included, what do you want? I'll tell you quite clearly, but then as you start gathering the data, producing a dashboard for me, I will turn around, I don't want that now. No, that's not quite right. So it's something I think in HR particularly, as the world evolves, we've moved away from reporting, we're moving towards analytics, insights. We will talk about AI at some stage later on in our podcast, but it's something that we have to get to grips with. We really, really do, as HR experts. So the inspiration for the theme is data everywhere and not a drop of information.
I love that quote.
It's really cool.
Yeah. It's
where
interesting.
Do you start with this?
I think I was going to say it's interesting because you've got to think back to the start of this process, haven't you? And I think systems and technology has evolved. The way that we can access data has evolved. When I think back to the first HR system I used, it was an on-premise solution. It was on a SQL server. Getting a report out of that was easy for the IT team because they could write SQL scripts and pull the data out. Yeah. And when we moved to a new cloud-based system in that organization, the team were almost sort of devastated because all of that capability and reporting ability had just gone.
You know, it's interesting. In our first episode, I spoke about our ancient HR and payroll system and the mistake that I made by deleting some of that data. You could report really easily. Yeah. I could build a report within 3 minutes based on the employee, absence dates, reasons, number of dates, what the payroll is going to look like. It was really easy. So how has it got so complicated?
Well, I think this is the thing. So you had rows and tables and they were all linked and we knew how to link them together and what was correlational to other pieces of data. And then we got more complex. So HR systems are employee engagement platforms now as well. They're performance management. They're doing recruitment. They're doing learning management. And so whilst we had all of this data, probably in spreadsheets and reporting and, doing a quick pivot table or a summary was quite easy. We're now in a situation where we consume a lot more data, and therefore we need to provide a lot more data. And one of the really interesting things we talk about when we're talking through system selection and talking to new customers is data is key, isn't it? One of the 12 steps that we've talked about many, many times in terms of not being alcoholics, but the 12 steps to people technology success. We've talked about that many times, that data preparation is key. What's really interesting, I think, is people often ask us, where do we start this project? And I always say, start at the end. And what I mean by that is start with what you need to get out of the system. And that's not what report I need to write. It's not I need a headcount report. It's what are the business questions that I need to be able to answer through implementing this software. So what is my turnover? What is my headcount?
Yeah.
I was listening to a HR podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the lady on there was saying she was embarrassed when she's asked in this global organization to run a headcount report because she can't. She doesn't know the actual headcount because they're in separate systems. None of them talk to each other. There's always a delay. And so if you ask me the headcount today, it's going to change because 3 people are leaving, 2 will join tomorrow. And so I think that's the thing I always recommend. Start with what are the business questions you need to be able to answer. Now, I know that outside of HR, I want to link that data to other things. So what's the correlation between employees who are performing well from a HR system and then employees who are delivering well? That might be from my manufacturing process if I'm in that kind of industry, or from utilization if I'm in professional services, or customer satisfaction if I'm in a customer facing role. And also bringing together financial data, sales data, and various other pieces. So we've gone from this situation where we had those systems that were on premise, rows and tables that we all knew and could access, and as you said, 3 minutes to write a report and you had the answer to the question. Then we added all of this complexity into systems and processes, and we've built APIs to push and pull data, and we have things called data lakes now, where we're sending data from all of our various systems into one secure unit to link it together. And then now we've introduced AI. And that for me is the real pinnacle in terms of not just report writing, but analytics as well, because rather than going into your HR system and using business objects, Cognos, Power BI, Crystal reporting, all these kind of tools that we're familiar with to build a report to give us data, we're actually asking for the insight and being given the answer to the question we have. So if you as a HR leader go to your system admin, for example, and say, I need a report on our average headcount for the last 12 months. They're running reports of starters, leavers, doing calculations in Excel, manipulating that data. And that's that quote again, exactly. Data everywhere, not a drop of information. To interpret that, the HR person then might get a graph that shows average number of starters, leavers, and then the average headcount throughout that period. It's still not answered the question. The HR person is then looking at that Excel sheet or PDF and still has to interpret that. With AI, what we can do now is ask the question, what is my average headcount over the past 12 months? The AI tool will build the report, run the report, give you the data if you want it, but analyze it and give you the answer. Your average headcount over the past 12 months is X. It's been, this is the voluntary headcount turnover, this is the involuntary headcount turnover. You can ask those deeper questions. And I think this is where we've almost come full circle. And that's where a real key element of this is data quality.
And I think it's quite interesting when you then start to think about digital maturity.
Absolutely.
And the journey of where you are with your data. You mentioned earlier on working with some really big organisations, and we also work with smaller companies here at Phase 3 as well. And something that I've noticed, dare I say, is that the bigger the brand, actually, the further behind they are. And we work with a few smaller companies or perhaps public sector or charities who feel like they're incredibly behind. We're barely even reporting yet. AI is happening. We're barely even reporting. What's going to happen next? They feel like they're really behind. But when we go on their system selection journey with them, their implementation, for example, and start to think about data quality, data maturity, it's quite surprising the difference between all of these organisations, and that they're not as far apart as you might think when it comes to that digital maturity. Have you noticed that?
Yeah,
That people
definitely.
get quite anxious. We're behind. We're not where we should be.
Yeah.
But the reality is, they might be in a better position than they actually think.
Or worse.
Or worse.
Or worse, conversely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. There are some big brands and you expect them to have big technology and big capability. And that's often not the case. We worked with an airline, I won't name them, they're no longer around. I remember after doing an audit of their HR processes, systems, payroll, finding that there was millions of pounds being lost through payroll inaccuracy and inefficiency. But also, how they ever got an aircraft in the air, I will never know.
I don't like flying, James.
I don't mean from a technical perspective, but they were so technically inept in terms of processes and so immature. It was almost like, you see the war films and they've got the battleships on sticks on a map.
Yeah.
That's what it felt like. And you think that's somebody who you expect to be at the forefront of technology. And then conversely, we were working with a manufacturing plant who bottled drinks. And you would think, production line, probably not very technologically advanced.
Yeah.
Systems were quite immature. The manufacturing systems they had in that organisation, they still wanted a paper pay slip, but they were using, the latest cutting edge technology on the shop floor. And I think that's where you build this view. And it's a little bit like we talked in the Christmas special about, you compare yourself to others and think, I'm not where they are, but they might have had to overextend an overdraft to be able to deliver that as well.
Yeah.
And the critical thing, I think, is just understanding. You always say this when we do the 12 steps. You need to understand where you are in your context, in your organisation.
Yeah.
And that looks like the maturity journey you talked about. You start off with disparate systems. Maybe HR is still keen in records themselves, the duplicated entry from a recruitment system or from a paper application form. Well, a lot of people do. And the thing that I always say to somebody, we're talking the system selections. One particular customer who they are quite immature in their digital maturity journey, and they are very aware of it, and they want real-time analytics. And I'm challenging them and saying to them, you can't have real-time analytics when everything's written on that piece of paper on your desk. If it's in the desk, it's not on the system. So you can't see that information about that new starter yet.
Yeah. And I think that's the gap, isn't it? I love pen and paper. I love keying in. I shouldn't be saying this. But I do. And I think that just comes from, I suppose, the background that I've had, that non-technical point of view. So when we start to think about the gap, and you said, well, you're not going to get the analytics and everything from the piece of paper, it's almost the fear of, well, what have I got to go through? Because my argument might almost be, well, my piece of paper is very reliable and I can send that out, get it back within 5 business days. And then I'll have the information. I could argue that I'll type that into ChatGPT. It's going to give me what I want. It's almost the fear of getting that data into a system that I don't know anything about. I'm scared of it. I think this is where a lot of organisations might be. What would your advice be?
I think this is where we've got two things that kind of rub against each other. The friction there is the HR team's potential desire for how they use the system versus employee experience.
Okay.
And employee experience has to be the most important priority.
Okay.
In that organisation with the piece of paper, they're posting out that piece of paper to an employee. They're filling in a form by hand. Then they've got to find a stamp, go to a post box, send it back.
This is where I feel really old, because in my day...
Back when we were green,
Back when we were green, I've got really no issue. And some people don't, but then Gen Z, dare I say Gen Alpha, when I think of my son, they'd collapse on the floor if they had to put pen to paper, wouldn't they?
And
Sorry to all the younger listeners out there.
Yeah, you think about that now. I remember when I worked in an outsourced service provider, and we did lean systems. We did very, very much kind of reviewing processes, and the paper that went back and forth was a big challenge. And we made an intervention for new starters. We'd book an appointment with them, and they would come in and see us for 20 minutes. We'd fill all the forms in with them. They'd bring all their ID. We told them beforehand what to bring. One interaction, everything was done.
How easy was that?
It was so much easier, still paper-based, and we had to then go upstairs and key everything into the system.
Yeah.
But that improved the employee experience. It improved the time to hire. The value creation was quicker. The modern version of that, I expect when I'm applying to an organisation that I will fill in a form online.
Do you know, sorry, just to interrupt really quickly, I'd be really interested to hear or see on the comments the different views from people, because I love the first one.
Yeah.
And it would be really nice to hear what maybe some of our phase 3 colleagues or some of our partners think from that generation. We're millennials,
Yeah.
so the generation after us.
Even
how
as
would
a
they
millennial,
feel?
though, now, I prefer online. And I think
Okay, that was just me.
what I want, if I'm booking a holiday on the TUI website, I want to be able to go into my system and book my holiday at the same time and see
Yeah.
if it can be authorised.
Yeah,
That
the
is the
expectation.
expectation and the
Yeah.
level of experience from an onboarder. And bearing in mind all the things we need to know about a new person that's joining an organisation, particularly with gender pay gap, there's the new
Of course.
equality pay gap, and the reporting around that. We need to capture this data.
Yeah.
There is no time in an employee's journey when they are more of a captive audience than when they're joining you.
Yep.
To capture that information, get their ID uploaded,
Yeah.
get a picture of them for their ID badge, they're filling in their name, address, details, and all that extra information. That's a time when they're a captive audience
Yeah.
for you as an organisation. So why would I, as the employee, want to fill that in on paper, to send to HR, for them to then type it all in, for me to not get access to that system until day one?
Yeah.
Whereas with our onboarding process at phase 3, and people have commented when they've joined how slick and efficient it's been, they fill it all in online. They start to find out about the organisation before day one.
Yeah.
And the key thing is, analytics-wise, bringing it back to the point of the discussion,
Yeah.
I can see in our system who's joining, when they're starting, and how ready they are to join,
Yeah.
as well as them giving an indication through a sort of pulse survey in terms of how ready they feel, if they've got the right equipment, if they feel confident with that. The other advantage there is, through systems, we can be triggering other processes. So
Yeah.
access to IT requirement. These are all Billy basic things that we would expect now.
Yeah.
But for that organisation we were talking to earlier, that is a significant shift. And for them to have that real-time analytics, because they recruit a lot more than we do at phase 3, to see I've got 20 people on the way into the organisation, 15 of them are ready and starting next week. These 5 are nowhere near ready and they're starting next week. I can spend my time on the 5, not the 20.
Yeah. So we work with lots of different HR tech providers. How do solutions help with all of this? What have we seen that's particularly good when we think about data, analytics, reporting? What providers do well here? What do we see where there's, forward thinking that really helps HR professionals to get to grips with this, especially with reporting? Because we've spoken about the need now in organisations for report writers. That might change as AI develops. But what have you seen that's really good?
I think it's the $1 million question. And I'm going to go back to an analogy, which I always use when we talk about this. If I'm buying a suit and you're buying a suit, we're not looking for the same thing.
Yeah.
What fits me doesn't fit you. I might want a system or a suit that I'm going to wear every day. You might be looking for one just for special occasions.
Yep.
You might want high quality fabric. I might want cheap and cheerful. There's lots of differences in terms of what we're looking for. So if you are a compliance-based organisation, let's take a healthcare provider, for example, they've got to have training records. They've got to have gaps in employment covered, repeat checks, training that is mandatory and statutory training like medication, for example. We're taking membership data like NMC memberships, systems that will empower the individual to do that but alert the manager when that hasn't been done are probably the best solutions in that case.
Okay.
In other organisations where you've got high volume of workforce and you want an engaged workforce who might be quite disparate. So we've worked with an organisation who, the people that stand outside train stations and give you leaflets.
Yeah.
They basically provide those people. So thousands of employees, they're not really interested in their workforce being part of an organisation. They're an individual on the side of a street handing out a leaflet. What they want is quick, easy and robust access to a system where they can input their data, self-serve their data and get it back out. So it's the $1,000,000 question, and I think that is the key thing. Who you are will depend on what works well for
Yeah.
you, and that's why writing your requirements for a new system is important.
Absolutely.
But always build into process reviews, as you do in process reviews, how can I capture data, and what are the business questions I need to answer, and do I have a way of gathering that data in my process? So if we need to know if you've got nursing and midwifery council membership, what process includes gathering that, and who's approving it and checking that it's okay. Reports will only be as good as the data that go into the system. We know the old crap in, crap out
Absolutely.
analogy.
Yeah.
And so having processes designed around that will help. And I think there are some systems that do that better than others.
Yeah.
And, you know, we were at the HiBob Partner Summit last week. And HiBob, in terms of its user interface, is very intuitive for users. It's really engaging, and it gathers more information than an organisation needs. And
Yeah.
they have really high utilization of their system. They average around 85 to 90% of all employees engage regularly with the software.
Yeah.
Now, if I think of other pieces of software that we've worked alongside, for example, a piece of software that's really popular in local authorities and schools, people might log on to self-service once a month to view a payslip, and even that is a struggle for them
Yeah.
because they're doing other things. The software's hard to use and they're not interested in it. So you're never going to capture data like that. So
Yeah.
the ease of entry is the key. If you had to click 30 times to buy something off Amazon, you wouldn't buy from Amazon.
Yeah.
It's the same in your HR system for gathering data.
Yeah. And it all comes back to the same thing, what type of organisation you are, where you are in that journey, because it's easy both ways to then end up with something that's potentially too big or too clever for your organisation, maybe very expensive.
Yeah.
So you need to be really clear on what you want from that data, what questions you want answered.
And it's interesting because the government have obviously thought about this, and in the new legislation that's been introduced around equity and equality reporting, one of the metrics that we often have to measure is how many people said prefer not to say. So if you're asking me my disability status, my gender, my gender's different because you have to have it legally for HMRC. But if we talk about ethnic origin, for example, the option of prefer not to say, you can make it mandatory field in many systems, but you still have to give the option to not disclose.
Right.
The non-disclosure rate is going to be something that will be used to measure a business's effectiveness and culture. Because if you're saying you've got a 70% percentage of people who are saying, I prefer not to tell you this, it's indicative of an organisation that's not trustworthy in terms of that data.
Very interesting.
Yeah, so even, you know, the government are starting to think about in legislation, how can we do something about that? So that would be a board requirement to change the culture to have a higher percentage of actual responses so that equity reporting is actually more representative of the organisation.
It's so interesting, isn't it? How does people science relate into all of this?
People science it's taking it a step further. So we've talked a lot about prescriptive analytics in terms of what has happened, the history, the trends historically, and then predictive analytics and people science start to talk about what might happen in the future, and it's bringing together further data points. Now, people science might look at a number of factors. So in some systems, for example, you might see you have an employee CSAT score, kind of employee satisfaction or NPS score. You've got their performance review metrics from their manager, perhaps 360 reviews from colleagues and peers. Recognition might be in a system where people are giving shout outs and thank yous. Then you've got their pay and where they're at within a pay grade. So system and people science can start to predict as almost like a 9-box grid where that person falls. So are they at risk of leaving because they're at the top of their grade, there's no succession plan, they're performing well, and they've not had a pay rise for 2 years, for example.
That's interesting. It's the next level.
The next level. And I think we'll go a level further than that. So if you think about marketing and if you go onto Zara's website, for example, and put something in your basket but don't check out, they know you've been there, they know what you're interested in, and they're tracking what you're doing so that they can send you an email to say, hey, you've got this in your basket, don't forget to check out. I think, and I've seen it in more and more systems, that we're starting to see a bit more monitoring of what employees are doing in systems. So, for example, if I start to browse internal vacancies, that might increase my score that I'm a flight risk, for example.
And how
there's
do
an
you...
ethical consideration.
Well,
there,
that's what I was going to say. Sort of ethically, is that the right thing to do? Should organisations be telling employees how you're using their
absolutely.
data?
I mean, that is the law, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Are you
GDPR.
monitoring what?
Yeah.
I'm browsing.
No.
No, it's not very interesting.
No. Oh, our systems don't do that. But obviously, we accept it in a marketing world. We go on every website and click accept to that cookie
Yeah.
tracking. And so I think that this is something that the access to more data gives us the ability to ask more questions. And why wouldn't we ask the question?
Yeah.
There's also these things, wearable tech. You know, if we are logging food, logging exercise, there is an insurance provider that if you share your tracking data with your health insurance provider, they will lower your premiums if you're doing more activity,
Really?
healthier things. And if you don't, then your premiums will be higher.
It's getting a bit Big Brother.
It is, but at the same time, there's an
You love-
advantage in terms of a reduced premium there
Yeah.
if you are doing the right behaviours.
Yeah.
And I think as we progress more AI, obviously, we're giving
Yeah.
it more and more capability. We'll start to, as humans, ask more questions, so we'll need more data, and we'll be expected to share that data.
So, what's the difference then between predictive analytics and taking the data that you've gathered, putting it through AI and getting the answer from AI?
It probably is quite similar. So if you've got a reliable data set and you can predict based on previous trends. So let's take a real life example. In a shop, EPOS software is tracking, in Five Guys, for example, the number of burgers they sell every hour.
Yeah.
They know if the weather's wet, they'll sell 10% more. If it's a Friday night, they'll sell more than if it's a Thursday night. So they can predict that next week we're going to sell X number of burgers in this hour.
Yeah.
So they can predict how many staff they need and how many meat patties they need, etc.
Yeah.
That's based on trends of data that we have. Now, if you put that into an AI tool without any of that context or history, it will try and give you an answer. It might hallucinate though, and you're not going to know that until the week after when it actually happens. And then you say, how accurate were we? So it's all about closing that loop of what did we think? Why did we think it? Why were we wrong? And then reinventing that loop time and time again. So we can do that without AI.
Yeah.
AI just makes the number crunching easier.
And I guess there's something in there where I could be really wrong here. AI is relatively new. Obviously, we've spoken before about AI perpetuating its own bias or AI not being correct. So with that type of scenario, presumably it's still learning. It knows that, I don't know, it's not going to look at the weather unless you tell it to. It's not going to say, well, 25th of December is Christmas Day. Please note that that's different unless you tell it to.
Yeah. So
am I wrong there, or do you think
AI isn't new? The accessibility of AI is what's new.
Yeah.
So it's been around for a long,
Yeah.
long time, and businesses have used it, and it's been used. And there is a difference between automation and AI as well, which is key. I think from an analytics perspective and the questions, what we do is expose it to more data so it can learn more.
Yeah.
And that's, we use Sage Intacct. Sage Intacct has Sage Copilot.
Yeah.
So that over time, machine learning is learning that every month we have an invoice from our payroll provider for X amount of pounds. We've got a purchase order for that amount times 12 for the year. It's learned that over time, if that transaction doesn't arrive, no invoice arrives, that's an outlier. It's learned that through repeatable patterns. That's the bit that we need to teach it. So we can give it lots of historical data to say this is what's happened, and then we can tell it what we think is going to happen in future, in the same way that in finance we forecast budgets for the next year. We will have some element of confidence in that. And I think the criticality right now is asking about the level of confidence in the response. And that's something that people who use AI well will do. They'll say, how How familiar are you with this data, and how confident are you in your response? Prime example, I put a document in AI on Friday for it to do some analysis for me, and it misread it, and it gave me completely the wrong information. If I hadn't scrutinised that and wasn't as confident to question what it had done, I might accept that and make a business decision based on it. So there's a lot to learn about AI, and we'll do a future episode specifically about AI, but it is changing analytics, definitely.
Yeah. So should we talk about building processes that drive data?
Yeah, we've mentioned it a little bit, and I think this is, again, it's going back to the thought process in terms of what question do I need to answer, and do I have a field where I'm capturing that piece of data, and how am I capturing that? So if we use that new starter example again, if I'm joining an organisation and I need to be able to tell the uniform team the size that the person needs in a new uniform, I've got to have a field somewhere that captures that, and I've got to have a form that asks the question.
Yeah.
That's the basic principle. And often we forget about where we gather that data from and what that process looks like. So I think that's just a simple example in terms of process. Downstream into payroll, for example, when we have a new joiner, we need a new starter declaration. Have you worked anywhere else in the current tax year? If we've not gathered that in the onboarding process, then when it comes to payroll, they don't have that information. So again, it comes back to the point I said at the start, which is begin at the end. What are the outcomes? What are the outputs? And work backwards from there to process and to fields.
Yeah. It's funny because as you were talking there, I came straight back to the theme, data everywhere and not a drop of information. So how, when the two work so closely together, do you not over-engineer your processes and start thinking so much about data you almost lose sight of the original question?
Or the employee experience. Yeah. That's the other thing. If you're having to capture a 300 field form for a new joiner that takes them 3 hours to complete, it's not a great experience, is it? So just in time interventions. And I think the other thing is, I am a fan, and I think a lot of people are in process review, of the lean methodology.
Yeah.
So looking at actually what is the best time to capture that data. You can't check perfection into a process.
Yeah.
Don't batch and queue pieces of work until we've got everything and then we're ready to release it into the system. So I think having intuitive systems and processes which reflect what information we need at the time. In that new starter journey, when we first apply, we might want an address to know if they're near the workplace, if it's a role that requires you to be there in person, but we don't need your address history. When they've been offered the role, we then need more information about them, and we need to gather their bank details to pay them. So it's about having the right information at the right steps and not frustrating people by asking the right question but at the wrong time.
Yeah. And something I think that I've learned as well, and this goes back to the digital maturity where you are as an organisation, etc., is also not letting what's the phrase? Not letting perfect stand in the way of
perfection
good.
Is the enemy of good.
Yeah. Where you start thinking so much about data processes, the art of the possible, when there is so much out there. Ending up delivering nothing because you still can't make a decision on what the process is going to look like, or where the data is going to go, what we're going to do with it. It's still chipping away to make sure that you're getting the data. You can produce then your reports, analyze them, analytics, whatever that might be, but getting something rather than nothing, because I think there are a lot of organisations as well which are just so stuck. They don't know where to start, and then you end up
and over engineering is a good example, and we've probably had this conversation quite a lot recently. We've been through an internal review of our data, and let's take an example. You as customer success want to identify if we've got a churn risk as a customer.
I do.
So to you that might be through interactions that you've had. To our finance team, that might be through the fact that they've stopped paying their invoices on time. To the person delivering, it might be that they've not turned up to a few calls. That's in 3 different systems. We've got 3 different metrics of a customer that's a churn risk. How do we actually identify which one is the one that we want to measure? And is that something we can calculate collectively? And that's why we have somebody who's responsible for, when you ask for a new field or I ask for a new field, they go, hang on a minute, is this in the right system? If I need to feed another system downstream, how am I doing that? Do we have an API available, etc.? And so we don't want to end up with lots of systems with lots of records that ultimately then we have to do a data quality check every month, run a load of reports and go and fill in everything we've missed, because actually it detracts from the whole point of having the data in the first place.
At what point do you think it then becomes apparent that you need like a data expert? So say you've got somebody in HR, they're looking at new tech, the art of the possible, what can we do? But they're not going to have that data head.
I don't think it needs to be a data lead as a full-time role, but somebody has to take the responsibility. If you think of the RACI of a HR system, somebody is responsible ultimately, and you should identify who that is, for safeguarding the records and making sure that a change control process is in place, so that if HR want a new field add in, somebody is reviewing that and sense checking, does it make sense? Have we already got it? Have we got it through 3 other lists that you can access? So it's just having somebody responsible for data integrity as part of their role.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. So I guess that leads us on to one of our features within the podcast. I don't know which one to go with. I think I'm going to ask you, what makes you green with envy?
Green with envy. So this week I'll choose an on topic theme. So I saw recently a demo of Sage People Analytics. We have Sage People, and we don't have the analytics feature. So this is a new AI tool, and it essentially looks at data historically, and it does what we were saying earlier. It takes the interpretation out of the human. So you ask the question that you want it to answer. It generates the data, builds a report, and gives you the answer to the question. Things like, what is my average turnover, as we mentioned earlier. So it's something we don't have. If you watch in Sage, I'd like a free license to test it out for you. But that's something that I really do want us to be at that leading edge of technology. It's a little bit like, I don't want to be the decorator that paints their own house last. So we should practice what we preach internally.
Exciting.
And what about you? What are you green with envy about?
Green with envy when it comes to data. I don't know.
Well, you've just had all of your prayers answered, haven't you? You've had a project that you've been working on internally on.
I have.
But it's an interesting experience, that, because you've gone from having disparate systems to now a dashboard, one page, and it's called the Customer 360, and it shows you everything about a customer that you need to know.
Yeah, and I'm very, very lucky that I've had that. So I don't think I can say that I'm green with envy at all, actually, when it comes to my particular role and data that I've been after for a long time. But then maybe that could turn into the green light for something. I know that's a feature that we sometimes use, a green light to organisations to find the confidence or the skill, whether it's in-house or something that you as an HR professional try to take on yourself, to be brave and go for it. Try and find the data that you're looking for. I mean, we've spoken a little bit about AI. So searching on there, how can I get what I want from many different systems if you're not blessed with what I've been, which is one of our colleagues who might make an appearance one day on the show.
Absolutely, I'm sure she will, definitely. We are out of time for today, unfortunately. We can talk about HR analytics probably for about 5 episodes in different threads. But I hope you found it interesting. Do add in the comments any questions that you've got or any insights into how you use analytics in your organisations. Thank you for joining us in the HR Green Room. We'll be back with more honest conversations, brilliant guests, and of course those weekly features that we've just covered. So don't forget to subscribe, share, join the conversation, and until next time, keep giving the green light to the things that matter the most.